So let me take you back to Somali and my jihad. My jihad is on several things, and I believe these are the right things that we should be worried about. Look how many Somalis were involved in this. Okay, and everybody's concentrating on Somalis. I'm going to give you a list of just who I believe should be dragged in front of a court of law and answer questions. And I'm not even concentrating on the Somalis, because the Somalis involved in this is a smaller number than everybody else that had to be involved in this. My jihad is on banks, but that will kind of be a theme throughout the entire show today. Banks are really, really pretty. They're great. They do a lot of great things, and there's a lot of great people at a lot of great banks. But the system itself protects itself, and they seem to always get rich while everybody else has to pay the price. They got their fees. And they knew, they had to have known. You don't run $700 million through an airport in cash. I tried to get $10,000 out of my bank at one point because I wanted to bury it in my backyard next to my dog's bones. And oh crap! Now I gotta shovel it up now. Anyway, try to get it. It took me 2 weeks. Now it can go faster than that, but they were like, we have to let the Treasury know. The bank doesn't have that much cash. And I'm like, you don't have $10,000? What kind of crappy bank? They're like, the Federal Reserve. It goes to the Federal Reserve every night. Now we're in Dallas, but every night it goes to the Federal Reserve, and we have to ask for the amounts of cash. So the money came from the Federal Reserve. That wasn't like Mildred going into the back and just pulling out 10 grand. There were all kinds of paperwork that. So you're telling me $700 million in cash came out of a bank over a 2-year period and nobody noticed it? Then nobody noticed it at the TSA? Nobody noticed that. Nobody noticed that these daycare centers are remarkable, serving more children than even exist in that community. Nobody said anything. Nobody noticed. And now, the last part. I am so sickened by the leadership of Minnesota. I mean, I would move from Minnesota. I mean, I know Minnesotans are now cheering. And they were like, wait, he was living here the whole time we didn't know it? They're cheering that I wouldn't live in Minnesota, and I understand that. But I wouldn't live in Minnesota. You couldn't pay me to live there, not because of the politics, but because the society is accepting this corruption. And now your governor and the whole apparatus that stole money from you are now trying to get you riled up for a civil war. At least the worst case scenario is civil war. Those are your governor's words, not mine. The best case scenario is civil unrest. They already let one of your cities burn to the ground. Why not burn the whole state down to the ground? Why? So they aren't called into question, so they don't have to go to court, so possibly they can get away with stealing your money? Is it Stockholm Syndrome? Honestly. Now, I know that involves hostages, but it's almost the same thing. And I was thinking about it, and it's not Stockholm Syndrome. But how do you get good people to do what people are doing up there? Well, you have to condition them for a very long time. And this happens on both sides. I want you to know. You have to be careful on our side. You're conditioned to go, Orange Man, bad. Tim Walz, bad. Okay? You're conditioned. And so when something happens, you're immediately conditioned to go, no, your bad side, me good side, okay? So that plays a role in it. But the other part that plays a role is if you have been this wrong and you have defended somebody like this for so long and you've turned a blind eye to local reports and everything else and you went, that can't be true. And you're so deeply into it, it is almost impossible for you to admit that you were that wrong for that long. Especially if the other side says, you're wrong, instead of saying, you're looking at this, I think, the wrong way. Can I give you another way to look at this? Instead of welcoming people and saying, no, I understand how you're feeling. I get it. If we are on our side saying, You're wrong. You're part of the problem. You never. Well, they'll never change their mind. They only harden their positions, and you will have civil unrest or civil war. In the meantime, we have to pursue this. The federal agents cannot be turned around. You have to change this, because if you can't break the spell and there is no accountability ever, then, the predators will just do it again. They'll do it bigger. They'll do it in the daylight. Guardrails are real until somebody decides they're not. Okay? So I started making a list last night until I had no more lead in the universe to put into a pencil and write it down. Start making a list. I'm a little like Santa if he were on a jihad. And because I made a list, and it's a long list, and I've checked it twice. Now, this is just the list of the system, okay? Everybody is freaking about Somalis. I suggest we start looking at the system, because this far outnumbers the Somalis that were involved, I think. So, who should be called in for questioning? Who should be worried tonight? This is another reason why they can set the state on fire and nobody in government's going to say a word. So who needs to be questioned? Who most likely at least knew and failed to say anything? I'm not saying they're complicit, but they at least knew and failed to say anything. You got to question the program directors, the division directors who oversee child nutrition, daycare reimbursement, grant administration, the payment approval managers and supervisors. These are the people who can override a hold and approve exceptions. If something's hinky, you got to talk to the people who went, don't worry about it. Okay. The contract grant officers and their supervising chain, because there's exceptions. Something was hinky and somebody said, hey, this doesn't look right. And somebody else had to say, don't worry about it. Okay. The internal audit leadership that is assigned to all of those agencies. These are people who possibly will face jail time if the universe worked the way it should. The compliance and integrity units inside the agencies. Anybody who is involved in integrity and the integrity office. The agency general counsel. All of the people in the agencies who are like, are we doing anything illegal here? Can we get by with all of this stuff? Any legal review staff involved in the escalations. The state finance people, the budget oversight personnel, anybody who would see abnormal burn rates of that money and the concentrations of that money and go, something's not right here. Because the system, remember, the system is designed to look for things outside of the pattern. That's how you spot fraud. So everything has been designed to spot that. This isn't something like, well, we never saw airplanes flying into buildings. Nobody ever thought of that. We thought of fraud. So there are tripwires everywhere. You need to question the inspector general. Anybody who had oversight functions, okay? Federal funding and oversight interfaces. So now this is the next level. This goes from the state to the federal. The USDA program oversight and compliance liaisons tied to the program streams. The federal and state coordination points responsible for responding to audit findings or corrective action plans. So now the auditors who are like, hey, there's something hinky here. Then you go to the banks, the bank managers at the branches, the regional operations manager where high volume cash activity was occurring, the Bank Secrecy Act, the AML investigators assigned to the accounts, anybody where there was a yellow ticket that went up, who was advised, who was assigned to look into that, and why didn't you act on that? The yellow ticket committees, the governance groups, the senior compliance leadership, that's regional and the local and the state bank, the risk officers, the compliance officers, anybody who was looking at legal and risk, should we keep this customer? Because there is a risk here. Are we going to be held responsible? The correspondent banking, the wire risk teams. When you send a wire, I want to look at everybody who was involved in sending that wire. I want to look at all of the risk teams and what they said, what they did. anybody who was moving money internationally or through high-risk corridors. How did you do that? How did you move money just to Somalia? That alone sends up red flags. Then you get to the TSA and the airport. I want to question everybody in the TSA, the supervisory chain, anybody who was responsible for noticing patterns, the airport security operations management, the people who are responsible for reporting and receiving the reports on anything out of line, any joint task force liaison roles that interfaced with repeated cash move. You know they're getting calls. And if they didn't, I want to know why. Who made that call to say, don't make the calls anymore? The currency reporting enforcement from our border patrol, from our customs. Why weren't they involved? Or were they? Any kind of outbound international cash, that should have shown up with our customs. Why did no one in customs say anything? Then you have the prosecutors, the agency investigators who documented early red flags. Why weren't they listened to? Who said, shut up about this? Supervisors who decided whether to refer, escalate, or pause payments. Was there anybody in line that said, hey, we need to check this out before we send any more money here? Any task force leadership coordinating multi-agency response timelines, okay? That's me at home last night, just ranting. You know who else? What happened to this people? Why isn't customs doing it? Why did the person on the front line, who did they report to? Who did they report to? Who stopped them from $700 million? Who in Washington was saying, don't look into, did it make it to Washington? If it didn't make it to Washington, how come it didn't make it to Washington? This shows the banking, the state, and the feds were completely, at best, every tripwire failed. And there are hundreds of them. I don't believe they failed. People intentionally were either involved or they intentionally chose not to get involved. You couple that with a state full of people that don't want to look into it now that it's been exposed, and are willing to look at the people who did this to them and say, yeah, I want to march in the streets. I want to put my body in front of the feds who are doing investigations, who are trying to do this. I want to put my body in front of them to protect Tim Walz and his cronies, or the people at the airport, or the people at the banks. There's something deeply wrong, and you do not heal this society until you heal the people who were not involved, but who are willing to look the other way at this point. There's no hope for Minnesota unless you can turn the people and have them go, wow, I'm sorry, I was just blind for a minute. I don't know what happened to me. You'll never solve this, and it'll only get worse. Do not accept the lies that Tim Walz and Keith Ellison are now trying to get you to believe, that this is all the feds and their hatred for Muslims or their hatred of Somalis. It's not. I haven't even mentioned the Somalis. They're the least of my worries.